The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes when the phone rang. My house was gone, ashes and silence. And I was sweeping what was left of my life into a trash bag. The voice on the line said, "Mrs. Harris, you've inherited $18 million." For a second, I thought the fire had followed me into the call because my heart burned all over again. Money, after everything else had turned to dust. Is that a blessing? Or another spark waiting to burn me? If you've ever rebuilt your life from ashes, this story will speak to you. Stay till the end. And if it touches you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. It helps our little community of storytellers keep the fire of hope alive. The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes. I'd washed them twice, but it didn't matter. Smoke doesn't live in fabric. It lives in memory. The house was gone. The studio, the shelves, even the painting my husband made before he died. All of it turned into soft, gray dust. I was sweeping the floor of what used to be my kitchen when the phone rang. It was one of those old landline phones, half melted at the edges, the kind you'd expect to be dead after the fire. But somehow, it rang. I remember staring at it for a second, thinking, maybe. The fire hadn't finished with me yet. "Mrs. Harris?" a calm male voice said. "This is Attorney Wallace from Turner & Cole. I'm calling regarding your sister's estate." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "My sister?" I asked. "She died 20 years ago." "Yes, ma'am," he said, papers rustling faintly in the background. "But her will has just resurfaced. You've been listed as the sole beneficiary. The total inheritance stands at $18 million. $18 million. I just stood there, broom in hand, the ash clouds swirling around my feet. For a second, I thought maybe he said 18,000 or 1,800, anything that made sense. But no, his voice was steady, rehearsed, official. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "You might have the wrong Harris." "I'm certain, Mrs. Harris. We'll need you to come in tomorrow morning to sign a few documents. And please, keep this information private until then. Private. As if I had anyone left to tell." After he hung up, I just stood in the silence, the phone still warm against my ear. The afternoon light was slanting through the broken window, catching bits of ash in the air. It almost looked like snow. Beautiful, if you didn't know what it was. I found myself laughing. Not a happy laugh, but that strange, hollow sound that happens when something feels too big for your body to contain. My house had burned down last night, and this morning, I was apparently rich. It felt like a cruel joke from the universe. I sat on the back steps, the only part of the porch that hadn't collapsed, and pulled the photo from my pocket. It was Derek, maybe 10 years old, standing with a fishing rod that was twice his height. His smile was wide, fearless. "I built my whole life to protect you," I whispered. "Now what am I supposed to protect?" For a while, I just sat there, tracing the edges of the photo with my thumb. I remembered the day we took it. He caught nothing that afternoon, but he refused to leave until the sun went down. He said, "Mom, you can't catch anything if you give up too early." Funny how children teach you the things they'll forget when they grow up. When the wind picked up, I tucked the photo back into my pocket and went to grab my old flip phone from the toolbox. I knew what the lawyer said, keep it private. But I couldn't help it. There's a kind of silence that feels heavier than any secret. I dialed Derek's number. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Mom, you okay?" His voice was distracted, the sound of city traffic behind him. I'm fine, I said, though my throat felt like gravel. The fire took everything. But there's something else. I got a call from a law firm about your aunt. He was quiet for a beat, then, Aunt Lydia? What about her? They said I'm inheriting something from her. 18 million. He exhaled a short, stunned laugh. 18? What? I don't understand it either, I said softly. They told me not to tell anyone. But, well, you're not anyone. You're all I have. There was a pause on the line. Yeah, he said finally. Of course. The conversation didn't last much longer. He said he'd call back later, but he didn't. I tried to tell myself he was busy. He always was. But there was a flicker of doubt I couldn't put out. By sunset, I was packing what little I had into the car. A few photo albums that smelled like smoke, my mother's old silver locket, a half-burned journal. I was driving to the motel on Route 7 when the headlights appeared in my mirror. Bright, too bright. A black truck. Close. Too close. At first, I thought it was just someone impatient on the narrow road. But when I turned left, it turned left. When I slowed down, it slowed too. My palms started to sweat. I pressed the gas and the truck matched my speed. Then suddenly, it lurched forward, closing in. The horn blared. My body moved before my brain did. I swerved hard to the right, hitting the ditch. The truck sped past me and vanished into the darkness. For a minute, all I could hear was my own heartbeat and the ticking of the engine. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. That night, in the cheap motel room, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me. The lawyer's words replayed in my head. Keep this information private, but how do you keep a secret that's already burning a hole through your life? The next morning, I looked out the window at the gray Oregon sky and whispered to myself, money comes when everything else is gone. Maybe that's not luck. Maybe it's a test. I didn't know then that the real fire hadn't even started. And before I tell you how it all burned down again, not my house, but my faith, I'll just say this. Sometimes, what saves you doesn't look like salvation at all. If you've ever lost everything and had to start from ashes, this story is for you. And hey, if it reaches you, if it makes you feel something, don't forget to like, share, or leave a comment below. It's how we keep our little fire alive. Derek showed up 2 days later, pulling into the driveway in a silver Tesla that looked way too clean for a place still covered in ash. I didn't even know he was coming until I heard the door open and his voice call out, "Mom?" It's strange how one word can sound both warm and distant at the same time. He hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give when your body's there and your mind's somewhere else. I wanted to say I'd missed him, but before I could, he stepped back and asked, "The lawyer said the will mentioned something else? A sealed document or something? Did you see it?" I blinked. "You came all this way, and that's the first thing you want to ask me?" He smiled a little, like he didn't mean to sound cold. "I'm just trying to help Mom. 18 million is a lot. You should be careful." He was right, but something in his tone stung. It wasn't concern. It was calculation. That evening, I made chicken soup. The same recipe he used to love when he was 10, when he'd come home covered in mud from soccer practice and ask for Mom's healing soup. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and warm, almost enough to make me forget the blackened walls around us. He didn't notice. He was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone, earbuds in, half listening as I told him about the fire inspector, about how the insurance company was still deciding what to cover. "Uh-huh," he said, eyes never leaving the screen. Did the lawyer mention who handled the trust before? I wanted to throw the phone out the window. Instead, I stirred the soup and whispered, mostly to myself, "You used to ask about my day." He didn't hear me. After dinner, I went to the small guest room where I was staying, what used to be the garage before the fire. On the nightstand, I kept my old phone. Sometimes I scrolled through old messages from my daughter, Teresa. She'd passed 5 years ago after a long, cruel battle with cancer. Her last text still sat at the top. "Mom, promise me, don't let money make him someone else." I remember staring at that message for a long time. Teresa always saw things clearly, even when I didn't want to. I promised her that day, but promises are easier when they're not being tested. The next morning, Derek was already on a call when I came downstairs. He was pacing, talking about clients, stock options, projections. The sound of his voice, confident, sharp, filled the room like static. He ended the call and turned to me. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe I can help manage this inheritance for you. I know how to keep it safe." I smiled softly. "Safe from who, Derek?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "From anyone who might try to take advantage. You've always been too trusting." Too trusting. He said it like it was a weakness. "Maybe," I said quietly. "But I'd rather lose money than lose myself." He didn't respond, just grabbed his keys and said he'd be back later. I watched him leave, the sound of his car fading into the distance, and for a moment the silence felt like a wall closing in. I sat on the porch steps, holding my coffee, watching the fog roll down the hills. A mother shouldn't feel afraid of her own child, but something about his eyes. It wasn't the boy I raised. It was like he'd built a new version of himself, one that only spoke the language of profit and gain. That afternoon, I found one of his old sketchbooks in the attic. Half burned, edges curled. Inside were messy drawings of dragons, spaceships, and one sketch of me watering the garden. He must have been 12. Underneath it, he'd written, "For Mom, because she makes everything grow." My chest tightened. I wanted to show it to him, to remind him who he was before the world got loud. So, when he came back that evening, I tried. I handed him the book. "You drew this," I said, smiling. He glanced at it, then gave a small laugh. "Wow, I was terrible at art. It's not about the drawing," I said. "It's about the boy who made it." He looked at me then, and for a second, the edge in his eyes softened. Just a second. "Mom, people change," he said, setting the sketchbook down. "You have to." "Not everyone," I whispered. Dinner was quieter that night. I kept trying to fill the silence with little things, asking if he'd eaten, if his company was doing well. But every word I said bounced off him like rain on glass. After he went to bed, I sat in the kitchen, the clock ticking so loud it felt like it was mocking me. I opened Teresa's last text again. "Don't let money make him someone else." I typed a reply even though I knew no one would ever read it. "I'm trying, honey." But I think it already has. For the first time since the fire, I cried. Not for the house or the inheritance, but for the distance that no amount of rebuilding could fix. Sometimes losing everything doesn't start with flames. It starts with silence. And that night, sitting alone in the dark kitchen, I realized something terrifying. The fire might have burned my house down, but something colder was burning my son. It was raining that afternoon when I first saw her. I was halfway through folding Derek's old clothes, half of which he'd never wear again, half of which still smelled faintly like smoke, when I heard a soft knock on the door, not the kind of knock a neighbor gives. Lighter, hesitant, like someone who isn't sure they should be there. I opened the door and found a young woman standing in the hallway, her hair damp, her hands shaking around a leather folder. She looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked. Her voice was careful, polite, but her eyes were searching. You look just like her, but your eyes are different, harder." I frowned. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" She swallowed hard, then straightened her coat. "My name's Naomi Kwan. I used to work with your sister before she passed." That made me freeze. My sister. The same sister I hadn't spoken to in 20 years, the one whose inheritance had turned my life upside down. "I didn't know she had anyone left," I said, quietly. Naomi shook her head. "Neither did most people. She kept everything close. But before she died, she left me with something. For you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick cream envelope, sealed and slightly worn at the edges. Inside, I could feel something hard, flat, and rectangular. "What is it?" I asked. Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. "A drive, encrypted. She told me to deliver it only when I was sure you were safe. And to tell you this, don't trust the ones who come smiling first." A chill ran down my back. Why would she say that? Naomi looked over her shoulder, as if someone might be watching, because what's on that drive could destroy people. Powerful ones, the kind who don't forget. She pressed the envelope into my hands and took a step back. "Don't tell anyone I came here," she said, "especially not your son." I wanted to ask what she meant, but before I could, she was already halfway down the path, her heels splashing through puddles. By the time I called after her, she'd disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a long time, holding the envelope like it might burn through my fingers. When I finally went inside, I set it on the kitchen table and just stared at it. The rain kept tapping on the window like an impatient metronome. When Derek came home later that evening, I tried to act normal. He noticed, of course. He always did when something involved money. "Who was here earlier?" he asked, glancing toward the front window. "Just someone dropping off papers from the insurance company," I said quickly. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on me longer than I liked. "You sure?" "I saw a woman leave the driveway." "I'm sure," I said. "You must have been mistaken." That night, after he went to bed, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since the fire. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside my bed, next to my wedding ring and Teresa's last letter. I didn't open it. I told myself I was just too tired, but the truth was, I was scared of what I might find. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of a floorboard creaking. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again. Soft, slow steps moving down the hallway. I held my breath. My hand brushed against the drawer handle. Another creak. The shadow under my door shifted. "Derek?" I whispered. No answer. I listened harder. A faint click, like metal against wood. My door handle moved, just slightly, then stopped. A minute later, the footsteps faded. I waited until the silence was unbearable before I got up, opened the drawer, and checked. The envelope was still there, untouched. In the morning, Derek was already dressed, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, eyes steady on me. I forced a smile. Fine. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was thinking, maybe you should let me handle the documents from Aunt Lydia's lawyer. Things like that can be confusing. I'll manage, I said softly. Mom, he said, lowering his cup, I just want what's best for you. There it was, the line every liar practices, until it sounds like love. He left for a meeting a few minutes later. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I went upstairs, opened the drawer again, and stared at the envelope. I couldn't shake Naomi's words. Don't trust the ones who come smiling first. I slid the USB drive out and held it up to the light. Just a small black stick, nothing special. But it felt heavier than it should. My instinct told me to hide it, so I did. Inside an old paint jar in the art studio, under the dried brushes and ashes. That night, when Derek came home, he didn't say much. He moved around the house too quietly, though, checking corners, pretending to clean. Around 10, I saw the faint glow of a flashlight under my door again. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just let him look. He never found it. I wanted to confront him, to demand why. But I didn't. Maybe because deep down, I already knew the answer. Maybe because when I looked at him, I still saw the boy who used to draw dragons and sign them for Mom. If I accused him, that boy would die for good. And I wasn't ready to bury him yet. So I told myself one lie to survive the truth. He's just lost. He'll come back when he remembers who he is. But even as I said it, I knew the real question wasn't whether he'd come back. It was whether he ever really left. It started with a vibration on the kitchen counter. Just one small buzz that felt louder than it should have in the quiet. I was making coffee when I saw it. An unknown number, no name, just a gray bubble on the cracked screen of my phone. Don't sign anything. The fire wasn't random. That was all it said. For a moment, I thought maybe it was spam. One of those scam messages about fake inheritances or car warranties. But then my chest tightened. How could anyone know about the inheritance? About the fire? I looked around the kitchen like someone might be there, watching. Derek had gone out early, said he had meetings downtown. But something in me didn't trust coincidences anymore. The coffee pot overflowed while I stood there staring at the message. Then another thought crept in. The lawyer had told me not to trust anyone, not even family. I deleted the text, or at least I tried to. My hands were shaking too much to hit the buttons right. A few hours later, Naomi called. Her voice was trembling. Mrs. Harris, she said, I think someone's following me. Who? I asked. I don't know. Black SUV, parked near my office since yesterday. When I came out this morning, someone had scratched the word liar into my car door. She took a shaky breath. Listen, if anything happens to me, don't go to the police. They can't help with this. It's bigger than that. Naomi, what's going on? I found out who Haven Ridge Capital really is, she whispered. Your sister wasn't the only one involved. They laundered money through charitable trusts. One of them was the fund tied to your inheritance. My mouth went dry. Are you saying that money was stolen? She hesitated. I'm saying people killed to hide it. The line went dead before I could answer. That evening, I couldn't focus on anything. Derek came home talking on his Bluetooth, words like client risk exposure and account restructuring floating around him like another language. I watched him as he poured himself a drink. His phone buzzed on the counter. When he turned away, I saw a name flash across the screen. V. Haven Ridge. I felt the world tilt just slightly. I went upstairs, sat on the bed, and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed again. Another message. No number, no name. He's part of it. I dropped the phone like it burned me. My hands were clammy. For years, I told myself I'd raised a good man. Maybe a little distant, a little cold, but good. I thought losing Teresa had just hardened him, made him chase success the way some people chase forgiveness. But now, I wasn't sure what he'd become or who had helped him become it. I called Naomi back. No answer. I called again. Nothing. At midnight, I finally gave up and went outside for air. That's when I saw it. Naomi's car parked halfway down the street. Headlights off, the driver's seat empty. I walked closer and saw the front end smashed against the curb. My stomach turned cold. The steering wheel was bent, airbags blown. No Naomi. The next morning, a neighbor, Grace Morales, the retired reporter who lived 2 houses down, showed up at my door. She was holding a box of cinnamon muffins and a camera slung around her neck. "I heard about the fire," she said. And now, the police were sniffing around Naomi's place. "You okay?" I told her what happened. The messages, the drive, the fear sitting under my skin like static. Grace listened, eyes sharp, nodding the way only people who've seen too much do. "Haven Ridge?" she repeated quietly. "I did a story on them years ago. They're not just investors. They move money through shell companies, nonprofits, art endowments, disaster relief funds. Wherever there's tragedy, there's profit." I stared at her. "You're saying the fire. I'm saying fires make paperwork disappear," she said, her voice low. "And sometimes, so do sons working for the wrong people." I didn't want to believe it. I wanted her to be wrong, to be cynical, to be the kind of woman who assumes the worst just because life taught her to. But when I thought about the night Derek tried to open my door, my stomach turned again. Grace leaned forward. "You need allies, not secrets." That's how it began, the 3 of us. Me, Naomi. When she finally turned up shaken, but alive, and Grace. 3 women with more fear than resources, sitting in my smoke-stained kitchen, planning to take on a corporation. Naomi spread out the documents she'd salvaged from her car, some burned at the edges, some with partial signatures. These accounts trace back to Haven Ridge's Cayman Fund. If we can match Derek's name to even one, it's over for them. Grace was already scrolling through public filings on her laptop. If we expose this right, the FBI will have no choice but to open a case. I sat there listening to them talk, the rain tapping the window again. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless, just terrified in a new way. Later that night, when the others had gone, I walked out to the porch. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the neighborhood whole. I looked at the burned remains of my house across the yard and whispered, almost to the wind, "There are fires that destroy, and there are fires that show us what was always hiding." The next morning, I woke to another text. "They know you're not alone." This time, I didn't delete it. I screenshotted it, sent it to Grace, then slipped the phone into my pocket. Whatever game had started, I wasn't going to run from it anymore. Because sometimes, the only way to survive the fire is to light your own. Naomi showed up at my door just after sunset, drenched from the rain and pale as a ghost. She didn't even knock, just stood there under the porch light, clutching her laptop like it was a life raft. "I cracked it," she said. Her voice trembled. "The drive your sister left you, it's open." For a moment, all I could do was stare at her. The air felt heavier than before, thick with things we weren't ready to hear. I let her in, and we sat at the table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. Grace joined us not long after, still wearing her raincoat, eyes sharp with that reporter's instinct that never really dies. Naomi opened the laptop and pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then a face appeared, older, worn, familiar, in a way that twisted my stomach. My sister, Lydia. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, her eyes sunken but steady. She smiled faintly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means I'm gone. And you probably hate me, Lucinda. Maybe you have every right to." I felt my throat close. Grace reached across the table and touched my hand, but I couldn't look away. Lydia kept talking, her voice calm but threaded with something that sounded like guilt. "The money they left you, it isn't clean. It came from Haven Ridge's shadow accounts. Blood money, Lucinda. I didn't know at first. I thought I was building a future. But by the time I realized what it was too late." Naomi paused the video and whispered. She knew everything. Haven Ridge used her to funnel illegal assets through art charities, fake endowments, disaster funds. Your inheritance, it's part of that system. I didn't speak. I just stared at the frozen frame of my sister's face. Naomi hit play again. Lydia's eyes glistened. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could leave it to someone who might. Someone who still believed in right and wrong. "If you take the money, promise me you'll do what I couldn't. Make it right. Don't let it die with me." The screen went black. For a long time, none of us said anything. The only sound was the rain against the window, soft and steady, like a heartbeat reminding us we were still alive. Finally, I whispered, "She's asking me to clean up her sins." Naomi looked at me carefully. "Or maybe she's asking you to forgive hers by doing what she couldn't." I laughed bitterly. Forgive her? She vanished for 20 years and left me holding her ghost and her guilt. Grace took off her glasses and wiped them slowly. "Maybe that's why she left it to you, because you'd never look away." Her words hit harder than I expected. I got up and walked to the window. The reflection of the three of us shimmered on the glass. 3 women, 3 stories tangled in one mess of truth and loss. When I turned back, I saw something in Naomi's eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear, but also conviction. "She recorded this months before she died," Naomi said. "And she wasn't just talking to you. She was warning us. Haven Ridge didn't want this money gone. They wanted it buried. If we expose them, it'll bring everything crashing down." I felt something shift inside me, something between dread and purpose. "Then that's what we'll do," I said quietly. "We'll finish what she started." Naomi nodded, relief flickering across her face. Grace poured us all coffee, cold, bitter, grounding. But even as we sat there, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down. $18 million. Enough to rebuild my house, to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to change everything. And yet, it suddenly felt poisonous, like every dollar carried someone's pain. I looked at the laptop again, the blank black screen where my sister's face had been. "You always found a way to make me choose, didn't you?" I whispered. "Even now." Naomi heard me. "Choose what?" "Between what's right and what's left," I said softly. "Between justice and peace." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Grace leaned back in her chair and said, "If we do this, there's no going back. Haven Ridge will come for anyone who touches that file." Naomi nodded. They already have. I thought about my son, his job, his connections, his silence every time I mentioned Haven Ridge. Suddenly, the pieces started fitting together in ways I didn't want them to. What if Derek's part of it? I asked quietly. No one answered. They didn't have to. The rain finally stopped. The house felt too still, too aware. I walked over to the counter, picked up the old letter opener that had survived the fire, and used it to pry open a wooden box that had been sitting untouched since the day the will was read. Inside were papers, contracts, wire transfers, bank seals, all of them stamped with the Haven Ridge insignia. Naomi's voice broke the silence. This isn't just inheritance, it's evidence. I nodded slowly, and my sister knew it. We stayed there for hours, sorting through pages, piecing together the story she'd left behind. Her rise in Haven Ridge, the laundering, the quiet donations to people she'd hurt. And finally, her decision to send it all to me. By the time dawn broke, the first light spilling across the table, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not hope exactly, but direction. Grace poured the last of the coffee into my cup and said, "So what now?" I looked out the window at the gray sky turning gold. Now, I said, we burn the right things. Because maybe that's what my sister meant all along. Some fires destroy, but others, they cleanse. The invitation came from Derek. He called it a family dinner, though I couldn't remember the last time that word felt like it belonged to us. He told me to wear something nice, said there was something important we needed to discuss. The restaurant was too elegant for comfort. White tablecloths, candles flickering like they were trying to hide the tension in the air. Derek was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window, his suit pressed, his phone on the table like another guest. "Mom," he said, smiling too easily, "you look good." I sat down, my hands clasped in my lap. "You sound like a salesman, Derek." He laughed softly. "Maybe I am." We ordered. He talked about work, new contracts, investors, the market recovering nicely. But underneath all of it, something was off. His eyes were too calm, his words rehearsed. Finally, he cleared his throat and pulled a folder from his briefcase. "There's something I need you to sign," he said. "Just a formality. The lawyers at Haven Ridge want everything clean on paper before they release the next transfer." The waiter arrived with our meals, interrupting the moment. But the smell of roasted garlic and wine couldn't mask the sour taste that rose in my throat. I picked up the folder, flipping it open. "What kind of formality?" He leaned back, trying for casual. "It's a power of attorney, temporary. Just helps move funds efficiently. You wouldn't understand all the legal stuff." I looked at him. "Then explain it like I'm not a client." His jaw tightened. "Mom, it's simple. You sign, and Haven Ridge can finalize the process. You'll still have access to everything." "Everything," I repeated, tracing my finger along the signature line. "That's a dangerous word, Derek." He forced a smile. "You always think the worst of me." "No," I said quietly. "I think exactly enough." The waiter refilled our glasses and left. For a while, neither of us spoke. The candle between us flickered wildly, the flame stretching and shrinking as if it knew what was coming. I folded the paper closed and set it down. "Do you remember when you were 8, I said, and you built that little clay figure in my class, the one with the crooked wings?" He frowned, caught off guard. "Sure. You still have it somewhere." "I do," I said. "You cried when it cracked in the kiln. You said, 'I just wanted it to look perfect.' I told you, it didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be yours." He looked away, exhaling sharply. What does that have to do with anything? I leaned closer. It has everything to do with this. You've spent so long chasing perfection, you forgot what was yours. Mom, this isn't about philosophy, he snapped. It's business. It's survival. Survival? I whispered. Is that what you call selling pieces of yourself? He slammed his palm against the table, silverware rattling. The couple nearby turned to look. You don't understand what it's like to build something real, he hissed. You never did. I let the silence settle. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. You think money built your life, Derek? But it's been burning it down, one quiet deal at a time. He glared at me, but his hand trembled slightly. Then, almost pleading, he pushed the pen toward me. Please, Mom, just sign. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked down at the document. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap. Naomi's words echoed in my head. Don't sign anything. The fire wasn't random. I reached for the pen. Derek exhaled, relieved. I signed. Slowly, carefully. He smiled. Thank you. You won't regret this. But what he didn't notice was that I'd signed my maiden name. Barely legible, but legal enough to look real. Fake enough to buy me time. When the waiter came to clear our plates, Derek's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call, muttering something about Haven Ridge compliance. The moment he disappeared, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the contract. Then, I tucked the paper neatly back into the folder and waited. When he returned, his smile was back in place like nothing had cracked. I knew you'd come around, he said. You always do. I'm proud of you, I said softly. He blinked, confused. You are? I'm proud, I continued. That you've built a life where you don't have to look me in the eyes to lie anymore. The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling, spreading. His mouth opened, then closed. You think you're better than me, he whispered. No, I said, standing. I just never sold the parts of me that were human. He didn't follow me out of the restaurant. I could feel his stare burning into my back as I left. Outside, the night air was cold, the street wet from an earlier rain. I stopped under a streetlight and breathed. In my coat pocket, my phone vibrated again. Naomi's message flashing across the screen. You did the right thing. Don't trust Haven Ridge's next move. I looked up at the glowing windows of the restaurant. Through the glass, Derek was on the phone again, his face half lit, half shadowed. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the boy I raised, but the man the world had bought. And yet, even then, part of me still hoped he'd find his way back. That's the cruel thing about being a mother. You see the fire, and you still reach for the flame. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the contract photo stared back at me from my phone screen. I zoomed in on the Haven Ridge insignia at the bottom corner. That same symbol carved into my sister's letters, burned into every secret she'd left behind. One signature, I murmured to myself, can buy a fortune, but it can never buy back trust. And for the first time since the fire, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The call came at 2:14 a.m. My phone vibrated across the nightstand, slicing through the quiet. A man's voice, low and deliberate, said, If you want Naomi alive, bring the USB to your old house. Alone. Then the line went dead. For a moment, I couldn't move. The rain outside was beating against the window, just like the night of the fire. I looked around the small apartment I'd been staying in. Boxes half unpacked, walls too white to feel like home, and I knew there was no one left to call. Grace was out of town following a lead, and Derek hadn't spoken to me since the dinner. But somehow, I knew he'd be there. When I arrived, dawn was barely breaking. The air smelled like wet ash and gasoline. My old house, what was left of it, had been partially rebuilt. New wooden beams framed the skeleton of what used to be my living room. The rest was still scorched, blackened by memory. A single light glowed inside. I stepped in slowly, clutching the flash drive in my coat pocket. My shoes crunched over glass and charred debris. Then I heard a voice. "Mom?" Derek stepped out from the shadows. His face looked older somehow, tired, but still wearing that mask of control he'd perfected. "You shouldn't be here," I said. He gave a bitter smile. "Neither should you." There was something different in his eyes. Not greed this time, fear. "Did you call me?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, but I know who did." Behind him, I saw a flicker of movement. A tall figure standing by the half-rebuilt fireplace. Victor, Haven Ridge. His suit was immaculate, even here, among the ruins. "Mrs. Harris," he said smoothly, "you've caused me a great deal of trouble. I suggest you hand over what doesn't belong to you." I looked at him, then at Derek. "You mean this?" I pulled out the USB. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Now, slide it over, and we can all pretend this never happened. Where's Naomi?" I demanded. "Alive. For now." Derek stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Victor, you said she wouldn't get hurt. You said—" Victor turned sharply. "You think you're in control here, boy. You've been my errand runner since the day you cashed your first commission." The words landed like bullets. Derek's face fell. I saw it then, the full weight of everything he'd done, crashing down. I took a step closer, my voice steady. "You used my son. You burned my home, and now you want to bury the truth again?" Victor sighed, almost bored. "Your moral speeches bore me, Mrs. Harris. Some of us build empires. Others build regrets." He reached out his hand. "The drive." I held it up, fingers trembling. "You want it? Come take it." For a split second, no one moved. Then Derek lunged forward, not at me, but at Victor. The two of them struggled, knocking over the construction lights. Sparks flew, catching the raw wood beams. I screamed, "Derek, stop!" But the fire had already begun to spread. Victor shoved Derek hard, sending him crashing into a pile of debris. Then he turned toward me again, face twisted. "You should have stayed in the ashes where you belong." That's when I saw it, the small revolver on the ground near Derek's hand. I didn't move, neither did he. Victor took one more step toward me, and Derek finally looked up. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, run!" I shook my head. Not this time. He pushed himself up, bloody and limping, and fired. The bullet hit the wall of Victor's office equipment, the metal casing that held the backup servers for Haven Ridge's financial records. Sparks erupted. Flames roared to life, swallowing everything. Victor stumbled back, coughing, the heat engulfing him. "Derek!" I shouted. "We have to go!" He turned to me, eyes shining through the smoke. "I'm not leaving until it's gone. All of it!" The fire was spreading faster now, licking the half-built ceiling, devouring years of secrets. Naomi appeared in the doorway, her wrists bruised, her face pale. "Lucinda, we have to move!" she yelled. I ran toward her, but Derek stayed behind. "Derek!" He looked at me one last time. "You always said some fires cleanse," he said, voice breaking. Guess you were right. The roof cracked. A beam fell between us, showering sparks. Naomi grabbed my arm, dragging me out as the walls groaned under the weight of the flames. Outside, The cold air hit me like a slap. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sky glowed orange, the smoke twisting upward like a ghost rising. Naomi held my shoulders, shouting something I couldn't hear over the roar. My eyes were locked on the front door, on the house that once held everything I loved, burning all over again. And then, through the firelight, I saw him. Derek, staggering out, coughing, covered in soot, but alive. He collapsed onto the wet ground, the flash drive clutched in his hand. I fell beside him, pulling him close. "Why would you do that?" I cried. He gave a weak smile. "Because it wasn't yours to fix alone." The fire trucks arrived minutes later, drowning everything in light and chaos. Victor was gone. The servers destroyed. Haven Ridge's empire, along with every trace of their crimes, burned to dust. As they loaded Derek into the ambulance, he grabbed my wrist. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry. For everything." I touched his face, tears streaking through the soot. "Don't be sorry," I said. "Be better." The paramedics closed the doors, and I watched the ambulance disappear into the dawn. When the last flame finally died, only the smell of smoke remained. I looked at what used to be my home, charred, broken, but free. And, for the first time, I understood what my sister meant when she left that inheritance. It was never about the money. It was about the fire. By the time the police sirens faded into the distance, the house was nothing but steam and smoke. I was standing on the curb, a blanket around my shoulders, when Grace Morales pulled up, hair messy, eyes sharp, camera bag slung over her shoulder like old times. "Looks like I missed quite a show," she said quietly. I turned toward her, exhausted. Naomi's safe, Derek's alive, Victor's gone. Grace's expression didn't change. "Gone? You sure about that?" Before I could answer, Naomi stepped out from the ambulance, a bruise darkening her jaw but her voice steady. "He's not gone," she said. "He's running." And then, almost like a signal, a black SUV screeched down the road. 2 police cars followed, flashlights and shouting filled the night. I looked at Grace, confused. She was already pulling something from her coat pocket, a flash drive. My heart dropped. "Grace, what did you do?" She gave a half smile. "Well, we had to. The one Derek destroyed was just the decoy. I sent the real copy to the FBI 3 hours ago." Naomi blinked. "You what?" Grace shrugged. "Someone had to play both sides long enough to stay alive. Haven Ridge thought I was feeding them inside info, but I was feeding the feds everything. Every deal, every dollar, every bribe. The next few minutes felt like a movie unraveling in reverse. The police cornered the SUV, Victor dragged out in handcuffs, shouting threats about lawyers and legacies. Cameras flashed, agents read him his rights. He spotted us, 3 women standing under the streetlight, and his voice cracked with fury. "You think this changes anything?" Grace's reply was calm. "No, Victor, it doesn't change anything. It ends it." He laughed bitterly as they shoved him into the car. "You're just women with a grudge." Naomi stepped forward, her tone cutting through the noise. "No, we're women with receipts." For the first time, Victor went quiet. When the police cars finally drove away, the air seemed to lighten. The rain had stopped, and all that remained was the smell of smoke and justice. Naomi sat on the hood of the car, wiping her eyes. "I can't believe it's over," she whispered. "It's not," I said softly. "Not until every family they ruined gets something back." Grace nodded. "The Bureau's freezing Haven Ridge's assets. That money's going to rebuild more than they ever planned." We stood there, 3 women bound not by tragedy anymore, but by choice. Naomi looked at me and said, "He thought we were just pawns, Lucinda, that we'd break, that we'd choose silence over truth." I smiled faintly. Men like him always think that. They've built their empires on our quiet. Grace pulled out her phone, hit record, and pointed the camera at us. "So, let's rewrite the ending," she said. Naomi grinned through her exhaustion. "Victor Havenridge thought women couldn't play his game," she said, looking straight into the lens. "Tonight, we didn't just play. We changed the rules." We laughed then, tired, shaky laughter that felt more like release than joy. As Grace lowered the camera, she said, "You realize this story's going to hit headlines by morning." "Good," I replied. "Let them read what real strength looks like." The dawn started to rise, painting the wreckage in pale gold. Naomi leaned against me, whispering, "After everything. Do you feel lighter?" I looked at the ruins of the house, smoke still curling toward the sky. "Not lighter," I said, "just cleaner." For a long time, none of us spoke. The wind carried the smell of ash and rain, a scent that felt almost sacred now. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "You know, people are going to call this revenge." I shook my head. "No, revenge is what they expected. This," I gestured toward the horizon, where sunlight began breaking through. "This is balance." Naomi smiled. "Balance," she repeated softly. "I like that." We started walking toward the road, leaving the sirens, the smoke, and the ghosts behind us. Somewhere between the ashes and the sunrise, I realized something. The fire hadn't just destroyed. It had forged us, reshaped who we were meant to be. Not victims, not survivors, women who fought back and won. The letter came 2 weeks after the trial. I found it tucked between the morning paper and a grocery flyer. Plain white envelope, no return address. But the handwriting stopped my breath. Derek's. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it. The sun was spilling through the window, soft and forgiving, the way it used to be when he was little, and I'd sit right here helping him with his homework. The first line read, "Mom, I finally understand." He wrote about the court, the judge, the cameras, the reporters asking questions he didn't know how to answer. He said the hardest part wasn't confessing to what he'd done, but admitting why he'd done it. That he'd spent years chasing validation in places that only wanted his usefulness, not his soul. "I used to think strength was about control," he wrote. "Now I see it's about restraint. The thing I called weakness in you, your forgiveness, was the strength I needed most." My hands trembled. I could almost hear his voice, that boyish tone buried beneath the man he became. He said the judge sentenced him to 2 years of probation and community service. He called it the lightest punishment possible and the heaviest to carry. Then came the part that broke me. "When I saw you in the courtroom, you didn't look angry, Mom. You looked sad, but calm. Like you'd already forgiven me before I even asked. I wanted to hate that. But instead, it freed me." I didn't realize I was crying until a drop blurred the ink. He ended the letter simply. "I'll spend these next 2 years trying to build something real, something clean. Not for Havenridge, not for the investors, not for myself. For the boy I was, and the mother who never stopped seeing him. Thank you for holding on long enough for me to come back. I love you." I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease with my palm. Outside, a breeze was moving through the trees, gentle but steady. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid of silence. That evening, I went to the small mailbox outside the rehab center where Derek would spend the next months volunteering. I slipped an envelope inside it, a photo of him at 7 years old, smiling wide, holding up the clay sculpture he'd once made in my class. I'd written one line on the back, "Remember who made this? That's still you." As I turned to leave, I whispered into the dusk, "Come back as the man you once promised you'd be." The road home was quiet. The sky was pale blue, washed clean after rain. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not peace exactly, but the beginning of it. Because forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just gives us permission to stop reliving it. And maybe, I thought, as I walked into my half-built house, maybe that's what rebuilding truly means. Not walls or paint or money, but learning to live again, even with the cracks still showing. It took a year for the land to breathe again. Where there had once been ash and ruin, now stood a modest 2-story house. White paint, soft light spilling from its windows, and a small plaque by the porch that read, "The Rebuild Foundation." I never meant to start something this big. I only wanted to fix what had been broken. But sometimes healing has its own ideas about scale. Naomi arrived first that morning, carrying a stack of folders under her arm, her hair tied up messily like always. "3 new families this week," she said, smiling. "One lost everything to a flood, the other 2 to foreclosure scams. We'll cover them." Then Grace walked in with coffee and her camera. "You're turning into a full-blown CEO, Lucinda," she teased. "Don't forget us little people when CNN calls." I laughed, shaking my head. "If CNN ever calls, you're answering for me." We stood together in the lobby, a space once empty, now filled with photos of the people we'd helped. A mother and her 2 sons smiling in front of their rebuilt bakery. An old veteran standing beside a brand new workshop. Every wall told a story of loss, and how loss doesn't always get the last word. Sometimes, I still thought about Derek. He was out now, free but not quite the same. He'd been volunteering quietly at a halfway house in Portland, helping men who'd made the same mistakes he once did. Every few weeks, he'd send me a postcard, always with a sketch of some kind. The last one showed a bird rising from a pile of cinders. Underneath, he'd written, "Not all fires destroy, Mom. Some just clear the sky." That line stayed with me. We hosted our first official gathering that afternoon. Dozens of people, some still in shock from their own tragedies, some just starting over. I gave a short speech, though I never liked public speaking. I used to think fire was only about loss. I began, looking at their faces. But after everything that happened, I've learned something else. Fire doesn't just take, it reveals. It strips away what was false, so what's real can finally breathe. There was silence for a moment, the kind that feels like listening. When my house burned down, I thought my life was ending. When I found out about the money, I thought maybe fate was giving me a second chance. But it wasn't fate. It was a choice. The same choice every one of you has, to rebuild, even when the world thinks you're done. Naomi smiled at me from the back. Grace filmed quietly, tears shining in her eyes. I took a breath and said, "This foundation isn't about revenge or guilt or even redemption. It's about balance. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just steady." Applause filled the room, soft at first, then stronger. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe 23, her hands trembling as she held a photo of her burned apartment. "I don't know how to start again," she whispered. I touched her shoulder and said, You already have. You showed up. As the crowd left, the late sunlight poured through the windows, painting the walls gold. I stood there for a while, alone, listening to the sound of hammers from a nearby construction site, the rhythm of rebuilding. Naomi came back to lock up. You know, she said softly, your sister would have been proud. I looked out at the horizon, where the last traces of smoke from a faraway wildfire blurred into the clouds. Maybe, I said. Or maybe she just wanted me to remember that nothing worth keeping ever comes easy. Grace joined us at the door, slinging her camera bag over her shoulder. So, she grinned. What's next for the Quiet Three? I smiled. No more quiet. We laughed, and for the first time in years, the laughter didn't echo. It settled. Outside, the world was still scarred, still imperfect, still burning in places unseen. But I had learned to stop fearing the flame, because fire doesn't only destroy, it also chooses who's strong enough to start again. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to rise, not as who we were, but as who we were meant to be. If you've ever lost something precious, someone, something, some part of yourself, tell me, what helped you stand again? What was your fire? And what did it teach you? Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we tell. They're the ones we live through and survive.